right, my name is Enoch. I'm on the Vancouver Startup Week team. Super excited for everybody to join today for this session. Before we begin, I just want to take this moment to acknowledge that we're grateful to be virtually gathered on Indigenous land, regardless of where anyone is joining us from. So I'm grateful to be on a traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. I'm privileged to live, work, and play on these lands. And so I want to thank you all for joining us for Vancouver Startup Week 2021, and huge welcome to this session, which is Privacy and Security Table Stakes, hosted by Mirai Security. If you have any questions for our speakers, please post them in a Q&A on Whova on the sessions. You can also upload the questions, and I'll be monitoring them, and later on we'll have a Q&A section at the end. And with this, I'm going to pass the mic over to Mirai Session. So please take over, and we're excited to hear what you have in store for us.
Well, thank you very much, Enoch, and welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about privacy and security and why it's becoming table stakes for the startup industry. So, privacy and security are no longer nice to have, but rather table stakes. Privacy laws are growing teeth, supply chain attacks are on the rise, and buyers are increasingly asking for assurances that their suppliers are not going to put them in the news. Startups have historically deferred addressing the privacy and cybersecurity concerns, an elephant in the room, often arguing they're too small to be a target, security is too expensive, or that their acquirer will fix the privacy and security concerns down the road. However, it's 2021. VCs are pretty wise to buying privacy lemons. Procurement processes are now including the dreaded cybersecurity questionnaire. And startups who haven't taken privacy and cybersecurity seriously are losing business to the competitors who do. So this panel is really going to be focused on why privacy and cybersecurity have become so important all of a sudden, and how startups can become ready for the dreaded cybersecurity questionnaire. I'm going to pass it up to my panelists to make their own introductions. So Jennifer, I'll let you go first.
So hi, I'm Jennifer Strutt. I am working with Mirai Security right now, but previous roles had me as a CIO of Canfor, the world's largest forest products company. So large enterprise, and before that, a lot of Olympic Games and shenanigans like that. So complex and very highly secure environments. So that's kind of my background, and I'm really happy to be here to kind of have that hat on today, talk about what the industry folks that you might be selling to might be needing.
Excellent. Murat, you're up next. Oh, you're on mute, Murat.
Sorry. My name is Marat. I am the co-founder and CEO of SafeDigit. We make the exchange of information really easy, secure, and profitable. Before that, I was with Pci and Trulio. So I did my gig in 2 startups before. And before that, I worked for Amazon.
Excellent. And Ivo, last but not least.
Ivo Georgiev. I've been in the security industry for 30 plus years right now. 2017, together with Alex, we started Mirai Security to do security better. These days, I serve as the CEO of Mirai Security, and I find myself helping large organizations go securely through their digital transformation process.
Excellent, excellent. And again, I'm Alex Dow. I'm one of the other co-founders of Mirai Security and been focusing on the technology side of securing cloud and applications. So let's first start off with a definition. Privacy and cybersecurity sort of go hand in hand, but in actuality, they're not the same thing. Ivo, could you jump in and provide a little bit of a delineation between the two?
I think the best way to go about this is to recognize that in order to have privacy, you need to have security, but it doesn't work the same way the other way around. And the reason for that is privacy implies that there is personal information that needs to be protected. And to protect the data, the personal information, you need security controls. That's why it's not possible to provide privacy assurance if you lack the security necessary to protect the data.
Thank you. Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that?
How could I have anything to add to that? No, so, it's kind of like this circular argument, right? I think there's a lot of conversation about security, that's what you hear about. You hear about the big breach. You hear about, oh, somebody's, your lab data got breached from Life Labs in Ontario, and what does that mean to you? And I think when you start to think about what that means to you, you start to hit on the privacy aspect of it. So how do I feel about this data? All of a sudden it becomes something that you care about. Where do I feel that my data should or should not be? How would I feel if my data was exposed to bad guys? And so when you start to think about how it impacts you or impacts your business, I think that really helps to put the line between what privacy and security is. As Ivo said, you need security to protect the data, but that privacy is who is seeing it, where is it living, do I feel comfortable about it? And I think that's a really nice way to think about it.
Excellent, thank you. And Murat, working at 2 startups prior to you founding your own, privacy and security were actually pillars within those organizations. Can you talk a little bit about your perception of privacy and cybersecurity?
Right. So one thing to note is that a company can be perfectly secured, but far from privacy. There is no need for naming and shaming. We all know who they are. And for me, proper security is just the lowest bar that is acceptable today. It just merely means that you are not accidentally sharing your data with bad actors. About privacy, we hear a lot about privacy in relation to GDPR and CCPA and all other laws that came recently. But the earliest definition that I could find on the internet is actually dating back to 1890. That's right, it's 19th century. And it goes just simply the right to be let alone. It's as simple as that. So privacy is a really fundamental thing that every one of us should be concerned about. This soon to become a human right.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually really interesting that concept was 2 centuries ago. That's really interesting. So let's jump to
web browser cookies.
Well, and again, you are right. It is, if not already, will be defined as a human right to be, let alone, or in this world, sort of own your own data, rather than right now currently is sort of a dog's breakfast of what we actually do own and what we've essentially given unlimited license to use outside of what we've produced. Moving to the understanding the why here. So, Jennifer, you're coming from Canfor, which is a large resource organization that would be consuming various software products and whatnot. Why are large enterprises expecting enterprise-grade security from startups?
So it's really interesting. And as I was going over my notes in preparation for this panel today, I think back to all of the conversations that I have when I'm going through a procurement process, and what I like to, ask of my potential partner and provider. And there are all sorts of things like, have you even thought about this? It's not just about compliance. Hey, I'm SOC 2 or I'm ISO or, I have some designation, but it's not just about the paper. It's about the practice. It's about being able to hear from this vendor that they've thought about security, that it's embedded in the practices, that they're thinking about it, that they understand privacy. When you're talking about, for example, in my last role where you're responsible for the data of 6,000 employees, 30 sites or 40 sites across 7 countries, there's a lot weighing on you in terms of your responsibility to make sure that in the event that your vendor has an issue, that you're still okay. And so there's a lot in the back of your mind saying, does this vendor know what they're doing? Is my data safe? Particularly as you get into more the SaaS world where you're hosting the data as well. Used to be you could protect your own data center, you could protect your own database, you know where your stuff is. But I'm letting my stuff go elsewhere now, and I want to know that the house is in order. So it's a lot of responsibility on the enterprise side of who's got their data, what they're doing about it, how they can integrate safely, And that's why it's important to have partners who have thought about it and have a plan. You're on mute, Alex.
Now I'm on mute. Classic.
It's a classic.
So, you know, Murat, you've worked now at 2 startups that are typically supplying much larger enterprises. You know, what's your perspective on their drivers of why they're pushing these requirements down to the companies that you worked at?
Right. It's actually not pushing down. It's just becoming a part of the supply chain. When you're part of the supply chain, we all know that any chain is as strong as its weakest link. So a big corporation, they want to continue delivering excellent products and delight their customers. And when they onboard somebody to their supply chain, they don't want to make the chain weaker. So they're gonna demand the same high standard as they demand from anyone in their company. It's just natural. But it's important to do this extra mile for a startup, because if you are delivering to a big company, if you're delivering to Costco or Amazon or PayPal, that means that these companies approved your methodologies, and that have a great validation when you speak to investors or potential clients.
Excellent. Now, Ivo, there was a turning point in our industry around 2017 that really, and again, I sort of say like cybersecurity was sort of optional. Some companies like startups like, yep, we get it. We understand the problem, and we're making sure that our software is not going to be affected by it. But that was sort of the outlier. You know, startups were able to sort of produce an MVP, get a couple initial clients going, and then maybe it bolts on security afterwards. But there was a turning point in 2017 with Gdpr that really caused that trickle down effect, that where startups were sort of caught in the headlights really with these expectations. Can you talk a little bit about that? You're on mute.
You're on mute. We're all on mute at some point.
Okay, better. So GDPR was probably the first piece of legislation that was widely adopted and actually had teeth. And the European Union used those teeth against Google and Facebook, I believe. They were the first ones hit. And the reason for that, I believe, is to show that it's no joke. There will be penalties, and they will be levied against organizations that don't comply with GDPR. GDPR also is, in a way, self-enforcing pieces of legislation. In other words, if you have organizations that are providing services to you, and you have to be GDPR compliant, every one of these organizations that are your subcontractors will have to be GDPR compliant for you to be GDPR compliant. Not surprisingly, in those days, we had customers that were subcontractors to European companies. They were crunching numbers, and they came to us and they said, 80% of our revenue is now in jeopardy because we need to be compliant. We just got notified with this thing GDPR that we can barely spell. So what is it that we need to do? And so that's why it all started in 2017. Since then, many countries.
Oh, we might have lost him. Oh no.
Oh no.
Okay,
now
well,
for a commercial break.
Well, you know, I'm going to add to that, you know, GDPR was not created to go after the startups, but the startups were the collateral damage to it, because what ended up happening was GDPR was to focus on the Fortune 100 companies, you know, the Googles, the Facebooks, but also the Marriotts and the British Airways got massive fines for essentially implementing, you know, weak software that was then compromised, and then, you know, tens, if not hundreds of millions of PII records were compromised. And why, you know, startups are being impacted by that is because at the end of the day, as Ivo says, I love that self-enforcing, is that, you know, the enterprise is probably doing things pretty decently. They're going to be roughly compliant with GDPR, which is more of a legal framework than a technical framework. But one of those things is making sure that the supply chain is not adding exposure to that company. As Murat said, you know, the weakest link is the lowest common denominator of your security posture, and that's where we started seeing, you know, and we were talking with local companies, startups here, that were like, yeah, we were totally able to, we were selling our product, everyone loved it, and then GDPR came in, and then all these large enterprises that were already our partners started saying, hey, we can't do business anymore unless you have compliance. And we actually did this for, you know, essentially a SaaS that supports the retail industry. And, you know, I went to a birthday party with my wife, and it was, you know, a bunch of her friends around the table, and I talked to one of them, and I said, well, what do you do? And she's in sales. I said, I'm in cybersecurity. And she said, I hate cybersecurity. Well, why do you hate cybersecurity? And she's like, well, because I'm not able to sell my product right now because of this GDPR thing. And it turns out this lady was working for our client that we were helping develop their security program and their security policies in order to make them or enable them to be able to sell their products. And I circled back with her, and I was like, so are you able to sell now? And she said, yeah, absolutely. We're actually selling more than we ever were, because now we actually can have the, you know, for lack of a better description, a badge of honor saying we get this security and privacy requirements, and we're supporting those needs. Welcome back, Ivo. I got another question for you. So, you know, GDPR is a privacy law, but it's not the only privacy law. So could you, you know, give us a little bit of awareness of what are some of the other privacy laws existing and or are on the horizon that startups need to be aware of?
Yeah, I'm not sure where I dropped off because I kept talking without realizing that the link was not in place.
Hate when that happens, people hate it.
Yeah. So what's happening right now is a lot of privacy legislation around the world is being aligned with GDPR. And the reason for that is GDPR prescribes a very decent set of security, both technical and process controls. So it's being taken as a piece of legislation that if you comply with, chances are you're going to comply with whatever flavor your local legislation is going to look like. Canada, for example, has Bill C-11 that has not ascended yet, but that bill is very well aligned with GDPR to the extent that there will be a tribunal formed strictly for cases where there are suspected privacy violations, and the penalties that are prescribed are huge compared to what's happening today. Australia has a similar privacy legislation. State of California, same thing. All these pieces of legislation are recognizing what we started with. You gotta have security to have privacy, and they're putting the legislation in place so that companies have that bare minimum of security that's required to assure their customers and business partners that they know what they're doing on the privacy side.
Thanks, Ivo. And, you know, like when I was going to school 20 years ago, Canada was actually enacting PIPEDA, which was the privacy legislation. And, you know, Canada has always taken privacy quite seriously, British Columbia in particular, quite seriously, but never really applying teeth to it. And the new paradigm with these privacy laws is financial consequence. And we've seen it with tens and $100 million fines that are going to these enterprises, which is, again, you know, people are taking it seriously now because they're being hit where it hurts. Now, one thing that you pointed out, Ivo, is that privacy laws are popping up like mushrooms around the world, and some are, you know, GDPR was the first. And some are focused very much on just protecting their citizens, like GDPR. But there's other ones out there, I think Singapore and Japan, that are trying to push through that actually sort of enforce data residency. So Jennifer, could you comment on the challenge with data residency?
You bet. And I have it in my notes on the first one, but I thought I would sprinkle my thoughts throughout the conversation here today. But so you get into this data residency problem, and I don't know that everyone thinks about it in the way that I had to deal with it, which was you have a company, they make an acquisition in Europe, and you want to integrate systems with this company in Europe. And you realize that as soon as you open that pipe between your systems and their systems, all of your data is now under GDPR. So depending on how you're integrating with this partner, this company, this acquisition, like whoever they are, that can have a huge impact on what you have to, as a business, comply with. And so we made decisions at that time not to integrate systems, to keep things separate. And so it brings about this whole idea of, well, can we have AWS tenant there and have an AWS tenant here? Can we separate this data? Like it becomes pretty complex in a hurry, considering all the time that we've spent trying to have integrated systems and, sharing data and having visibility, and all of a sudden you need to split it all off now because you don't want to have the laws of one area of the world impacting your business. So I think as you see more of these things coming online, it just makes it more complicated. It's complicated for the business. It's complicated for the people who are delivering software. But we were talking about, can you say, hey, I'm SaaS, but I can hold your data here, and hey, I'm SaaS, but I can keep your data here, and all these things start to become important, and we never worried about them before.
Awesome. Now, Murat, coming from more of an engineering background, what are some of the challenges with trying to adhere to data residency, either based off of a legal requirement for a citizen's data to stay in the country of residence, or more so just trying to manage overall risk by siloing the data to minimize exposure and/or exposure to the laws?
It's an interesting situation when engineers need to work with compliance and actually with lawyers really close, because what if your database are distributed, but your software layer, the service layer, is actually not? Is it good enough? Or is it good enough to put them in? Do you actually need to split it both on credentials level? That means that it's actually separate AWS accounts. So these are interesting challenges, and working with lawyers and compliance officers, I can tell that these are basically one of the probably smartest people that I've worked with, because they know both worlds and they know how to connect them. AWS really helps, or any cloud provider that you are using, because you can spin up the database whenever or wherever you want, and you can put a SQL proxy between those, create some data affinity rules when you query the same proxy, and then it goes to the database that you need. But yeah, it's not simple. It's not a simple task. Jennifer.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's going to start to be like just like you hide your money in a special bank, like maybe somebody will have, I keep my data somewhere because the laws are really lax.
Well, we are sort of seeing
keep it in the
already.
Bahamas.
Yeah. We do see that with various privacy email services and whatnot that are storing in Switzerland to do exactly that.
Yeah.
So I could see a lot more of that happening. But yeah, there's two sides to it. So the piece that you were talking about, Jennifer, is really interesting, because we used to do that with PCI compliance, which is payment card industry digital security standards. And most organizations were rolling out their IT infrastructure very flat, with the payment server right next to their website, and that arguably is a terrible configuration. But in the PCI world, it means that your entire environment is within scope of a fairly strict security standard. So a lot of organizations would try to de-scope their environment. So re-architect it in a way that the part of the environment that needed to be compliant was very small, very isolated, and kept the auditors in that one little section, and then isolate everything else outside of it. Arguably, it's biting your nose to spite your face, because those standards are good. Payment card data is not the only important thing to a business, I would assume, and by neglecting those parts of the business because it's expensive to do security enterprise-wide, not that great. But yeah, again, there's quite a few laws out there right now that are really trying to encourage that citizen data stays in the country of origin, which makes for developing software. It sort of breaks the model of the internet. If you think about it, it's an open network that data can be wherever. Now, if you're developing a web app, you may need to architect it that you may actually be having a version in each country or each region. And then from an operation and maintenance perspective, that becomes more challenging, because you may potentially start having drift of your versions of your application based off of geography and other nuanced requirements that the countries have. So I could see it as a bit of a DevOps headache a little bit too.
Yeah.
All right, so there's a great quote from the co-founder of BlackBerry, Jim Pci, and I'm going to read it out here. "Data is not the new oil. It's the new plutonium. Amazingly powerful, dangerous when it spreads, difficult to clean up, and with serious consequences when improperly used." And that really resonates well with me. I'm obviously a partial tinfoil hat wearer when it comes to my data and putting it out on the internet and SaaSes. In fact, I read this morning that a mental health application was compromised, and this mental health application tracked all records and notes that were discussed between the therapist and the patient, and the hackers dumped all of that data. Arguably some of the most sensitive and intimate data that we would possess, and was dumped because it was, the software arguably was not developed in a manner to both be resilient, but also assume that a breach may occur at one point. And a concept that I really like is minimizing the blast radius, that if you're going to get breached, make sure the hackers can't take everything. And unfortunately, the hackers did get everything, and that's likely the database wasn't encrypted, or if it was encrypted with one key versus a key per patient. So from a perspective of trying to meet the challenges of HIPAA and various other legal requirements, what are your thoughts on that quote?
It's my favorite quote today. Until now, I was using the oil analogy, but yeah, it's really dangerous. Everyone wants to get more data because data is power, but you need to put this power to work for you and not against you. So it's up to you. Are you putting it in a reactor or in a bomb? But to cut the analogies out of it and get to the real deal, I am spoiled. I was working in really good startups that put their security measures and compliance really early stages. In Trulioo, I remember when I joined, it was just 25 employees, and we already were ISO compliant. Same about Pci. Shout out to Pci Health, because they're a really good example, because HIPAA is not regulating wearable devices. Basically, HIPAA is only for healthcare providers information. But we decided to go extra mile and actually be certified for HIPAA and high tech. It definitely helped when we were in sales calls, because it's a highly regulated space, and our clients are actually HIPAA compliant, and they want to stay that way. And it doesn't matter that we don't have to be, but it really makes it easier to talk. And so I'm taking this law and regulation actually not as a problem. I don't think that it's bad, and I don't hate cybersecurity. I think, in the contrary, it's a really great guideline of what you should do if you can.
Excellent. And you know, like security standards that are out there and privacy laws are arguably the baseline. It's the should be sort of the barrier of entry to prevent the dumb stuff from happening to an organization. By no means is it, you know, it may come across as extreme measures, but most of these standards are designed in reaction to historical breaches. You know, many of the standards we follow they're updated almost annually based off of how hackers are starting to target applications and systems. So Jennifer, when we were talking about this yesterday, you know, it was the to collect or not to collect, that is the question. But let's dive in.
Well, and so sometime last year, I was actually involved in proposing a product to deal with COVID, and got into all sorts of very interesting conversations about, okay, so your employees coming back to work, you know, you need to take their temperature because you don't want them to be, you know, infecting people. Well, you don't want to actually hold the actual temperature. You just want to say they passed and they're okay to come in. So you start to think about, well, what do I want to collect? How could I minimize that surface that I have to protect in terms of, you know, what questions am I asking and what data am I collecting, and in what way do I hold things that might be a problem from a security perspective, from a privacy perspective. And I thought that was a really interesting thing, because as soon as you start talking about health data, everyone's like, oh, don't touch the health data, particularly if you're not in the health business and this is not your bread and butter. So, you know, you look at what's the core business of these folks that I might want to do business with. Well, they're not used to holding health data. And I love what Murat's saying is, like, we're dealing with health people. They know about this stuff. We're going to meet their standard. On the flip side, if you're not in that core business and you don't really understand the ins and outs of all of the requirements of that data, why even have it? Like, just stay away and run in the other direction and mitigate your own risk as well as your clients.
Excellent. And again, it goes right back to the analogy of plutonium, right?
Yeah,
if you don't really know what you're going to do with it, you shouldn't be holding on to it, because you potentially get burned. And, you know, I would say in the 2000s, data was the new oil, right? Like, startups were focusing on, let's collect a bunch of data. Let's make, you know, let's create a bunch of data on things, and we'll figure out how to monetize it in the past. And for a time that worked out, but, you know, with, you know, mega breaches that we've read in the news almost weekly, if not daily, you know, the companies that are essentially wholesaling data about people are really feeling it when they, and particularly now with the privacy laws, are really feeling it financially when something bad happens. Now, a few years ago, Eva and I were approached by a startup that was about to launch, and they just wanted us to do a quick security test, a little bit of a doorknob jiggle, as it were, before they put it online. And, you know, Eva, can you tell that story?
Yeah, so excellent business opportunity that the client wanted to use to spread their wings in the US, where they would be getting probably 10 times the revenue they were getting in Canada. And they had a ready-to-go product. It was a piece of software running in the cloud. And they came to us as, you know, hey, we've heard this security thing is kind of important. Would you like to check us out? And, you know, they were ready to launch. So we said, okay, great. USA, there are certain pieces of legislation over there regarding personal information, and they were collecting, by the nature of the application and what they're doing, tons of personal information and medical information as well. So they said, yeah, we are aware of that. And are you actually encrypting that data? And they said, no. So long story short, a year later, they were still redesigning the application to actually meet the very basic requirements of protecting personal information and medical health records in some of the US jurisdictions. So a failed launch of a year at least double the costs of rewriting the application from scratch. And then again, they had to go through a full security and privacy assessment. So I wanna focus on another angle here. One is the personal impact. You know, my personal information, medical records are probably compromised as a result of the LifeLab hacks. Many of the people attending this event also have their data in there. So there is certain personal impact there, but let's talk a little bit about the pure business impact. As a startup, you're dealing with, you want to sell to large organizations for obvious reasons. And these large organizations typically come with large compliance budgets because they have very significant compliance requirements. They are not gonna jeopardize that compliance budget by taking a chance with a product or a service or whatever it is that you're trying to sell them that cannot demonstrate that you're supporting their compliance requirements by having proper security and privacy. So from a business perspective, it makes total sense to start working on privacy and security early in the game.
Absolutely. It's an ounce of prevention or a pound of cure.
Yeah.
So running a startup is nothing more than balancing multiple spinning plates. Eva and I know that firsthand. So how do startups balance privacy and security requirements when developing their products? Because, you know, if you only have a developer or two starting out, where is there any guidance we can provide in terms of finding that balance of making sure that they're still developing something that they can maybe get an MVP going, get some seed funding, but still making sure that they're not building something that they're going to have to rebuild once they actually start playing in the big leagues. I'll pass that on to Murat first. You know, what's your perspective there?
Right. So generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, the earlier the better, obviously. And the example that Eva was talking about is a perfect example. Maybe re-architecting the application will be just too hard down the road. But I just, as you say, it's a balance. And I just want to highlight, what are we talking about? What are we balancing here? So as a CEO of a startup, you need to get clients and partners. You need to attract talent, and you need to raise money. 3 core activities of a startup CEO. When you get clients and partners, we are dealing here with what's your CAC, what's your customer acquisition cost, and what's your total addressable market. So if your security sucks, then your total addressable market shrinks. And your customer acquisition cost goes up, because you really need to work hard to convince these people that you actually worth it to get the risk of getting you as a client or to become your client or a partner. About investors, security risk is a real risk that investors balance, because proper investment, it's balancing risks and opportunities. And the lower the risk, the more attractive the investment is. So if your risk is high, you need to get your value really, really high to convince anyone. So, and when we're talking about attracting talent, people don't want to work in a mess. If your security is a mess, it's just not fun. So if you're attracting, if you want top talent from Amazon or Google, you want to get your security ducks in a row so people will come and work. But it's saying all that, we need to look realistically about it, that client is king, especially on the early stages of a startup. So it's a balance.
Thanks, Brad. Eva, let's talk about functional design, and when doing things right, it's a marketing opportunity.
So we observe the following in companies of all sizes, but startups typically suffer from this more often than large corporations. Startups are focused on whatever their product or service is, And therefore, somehow they omit security and privacy from the core functionalities that they're trying to put in the initial product that they're going to go to investors or they're going to go to market with. Our suggestion is to consider the security requirements as a foundational for providing privacy and to consider them as a part of your functional requirements. From a business perspective, what this does is it lowers your cost of implementing the controls that you're going to have to implement anyway for all the reasons that were discussed so far, because you're going to be implementing them early in the game. It provides a better product, and at the end of the day, it enables you to actually sell the product and market it properly, because you can say, we've taken care of security as part of our initial design. And of course, it's always good to have somebody at arm's length check everything and vouch for what you're claiming in your marketing and sales materials, so that you can actually hold your ground when you get questioned by the security people of whoever you're trying to sell your product.
Thanks, Ivo. And Jennifer, did you have anything to add to this?
I do. You know, I like this risk reward conversation. You know, you get into this, it's a balance. And I look at that as a risk reward. And I mean, Murat's sitting there talking to us about, not only is it going to help you attract the people who want to work with you because you're not running a certain kind of show, you know, you also are taking care of stuff that's actually valuable to you. Like in today's day and age, this is creating value. Ignoring it, no matter how much faster your dev cycle is because you didn't have to do this and this and this, is not going to help you in the long run. So you get into the thought pattern of, okay, so what are my risks if I'm not taking care of this early? What are my risks if I haven't thought about it? What are my risks if I don't have anybody who has a clue about this? I think that the other flip side, on the reward side, there's a lot there. I was thinking about the idea of it doesn't take much. That's the other thing. Like, we're talking about being aware, we're talking about taking some steps, we're talking about having a strategic direction, which would take you to say, I have a guiding principle that I want to have a secure product. When baked in at the beginning, this is not a major problem that's going to cause you to re-architect your entire platform and you know, miss a major launch. So I really, that's kind of where I sit on that, and maybe that as a concept would help the conversation, because even if you just say, I need a champion of security, even if I don't have a CISO, and go find that out and make sure that we're starting early, I think it's gonna sow a lot of really productive seeds.
Yeah, and you're totally right, Jennifer. The initial thing that startups really need to do is just be aware of, you know, the responsibility they have when they're collecting sensitive data. And again, we're talking about privacy because that is what typically is driving a lot of security requirements. But there is always security in terms of, well, protecting your product and your intellectual property and the availability of your application to the consumer. But you know, nothing lights a fire under one's butt than a financial penalty, and privacy is that fire. So, you know, let's wrap up with like talking about some first steps startups can take to ensure they're meeting future client requirements. So Jennifer, I'll start with you.
Well, and so I go back to these ideas of what does this future client ecosystem look like for your company? So are you going to be global? Are you going to have people who are going to be caring about Gdpr? Are you going to have big companies who worry about how they're going to integrate with you and how they're going to do that safely? And I think that's, you know, how big am I going to get? Where do I want to get to? And start taking a look at some of those concerns and some of those requirements very early on. And, you know, there's stuff around. It's not like you have to go digging really far for this kind of information. But I think if you can start there and say, what is those clients that I'm going after, and imagine what kinds of things that are going to come your way. We get back into, you know, an ounce of prevention and a pound of cure. But but I think we've covered a lot of them, you know, even in this conversation, which would point you in the right direction to make sure that you're doing those things early.
Excellent, thanks. Ivo, does data classification help in the early days?
I think organizations in general should know what data they process, acquire, and share with third parties. This may sound like something that's super easy and comes naturally, but in reality, it's a very complex matter. And if it happens so that some pieces of data fall under the definition of personal information, it becomes even more complex because now you have legal liability. Data classification is the process where you go through this list of pieces of data that you're going to be processing, and you decide what level of protection is necessary for each category of data. So obviously for personal information, the law tells you to what level it needs to be protected. But then you have business sensitive, top secret, for internal use only, and for public consumption. And many organizations have their own classification. From a business perspective, this is super important because if you don't classify your data, two things will happen. A, you're going to be delivering pizza in armored trucks. In other words, you're going to be spending tons of money on security to protect something that can be protected with much less financial outlay. Or worse, you're going to be having underprotected assets and you might incur legal and even financial liability with that. So having the data classified helps you optimize your budget, however big it is, that you have designated for this very purpose.
Thanks, Ivo. And Murat, do you have, like, we have one last step about methodology and frameworks, but did you have any, like, what would be a first step for startups?
Yeah, I'm going to be brief here because I want to be conscious of time. But I want to echo what Jennifer said. Start with your customers, start with your target audience, and see what is important to them. That is always a good start. And don't treat the law as a barrier. It's actually a guideline. It's a guideline for you to do the right thing.
I love it. So yeah, let's wrap up with Inaki, do we have any questions that we want to cover now?
I'm just looking, maybe there's one question I think that came through. So I think it was appreciated that you talked about the balance between, you know, as a CEO or as a startup owner, myself as a founder too, you know, we always want to kind of weigh the balance between investing, being able to put money towards having secure systems, but also wanting to balance out, well, we know to grow too, we can't lock up too much of our capital here. But I think what you guys talked about was the importance of not just risk mitigation, but how this could be used as an ROI driver. It could be used for marketing in so many different ways to bring it in. So I think that was a really nice way of presenting it in ways that I think people wouldn't have thought otherwise. So one of the questions they had was based on that, are there other areas that might have been overlooked, or let's say common areas of vulnerabilities for companies, especially with companies now dealing with third-party apps or different platforms and cloud-based systems? And even as they're kind of growing their own databases, realizing, hey, you know, this is something serious. We can't just have it stored there. But are there other kind of areas that you think that should be addressed, or that you think, yeah, Jennifer?
Yeah, so, you know, I talk about, well, if I'm a potential client, what do I want you to do? You should be thinking about who are your vendors? What products are you using? So you should be asking all these sticky questions to the people who want to sell you services. Because the investments that you're making to build your products are important as well. And those decisions can either support you and actually improve your circumstance, or actually make you vulnerable. So you know, oh, then we can take this little API, we can do such and such over here, and then they have a problem with their own house, and now it's impacting your business. So it's not just your customer, be a customer as well, and make sure that your vendors are giving you what you need.
Yeah, maybe I'll echo on that. That's a really good point, that it's not just the startup supplying the big company, but like, what are the supply chain of the startup? You know, historically how software is developed is arguably path of least resistance. You know, software developers have that mentality of getting something done fast and as efficiently as possible. Security is that extra layer that, you know, has been a nice to have, and something that like we've had a lot of discussions on, we've written blog posts on, is like the software composition problem. That like no software is original code. It is other people's code that you downloaded off the internet, glued together with, you know, some novel ideas. And the problem is that the code and the libraries that you're pulling off the internet, you know, this concept of like open source is really trusted because everyone can see it. That makes the assumption that somebody has actually reviewed that code. And that code hasn't changed since the review. And there have been numerous security breaches with, you know, software repositories that like NPM, where something that we trust became untrusted, and it was very challenging for a software development team to actually recognize that something we trusted, which arguably maybe we shouldn't have trusted, has now become hostile and has now embedded something in our environment. So it is, and again, that is a whole nother panel discussion on the software composition problem that, you know, I'm sure Murat and I could go spend an hour discussing, but it's something worth considering, is like what you're putting in your code. How are you assessing the risk of that? Ivo, do you have anything to add to this question?
Yeah, I'll go to the very basics here, because the following still keeps popping up much more frequently than people expect, especially with SaaS companies. What are you doing for security? Oh, we are in the cloud. We are with AWS, we are with Azure, whatever the case may be. How come? Well, they do the security, we just put our product up there. So that basic misunderstanding of there is the security of the cloud, which the cloud providers are responsible for. In other words, create the cloud and keep it running. And there is security in the cloud, of which you are responsible. And so that's something that needs to be very quickly recognized. And then from there, the next question becomes, well, okay, what is it that we need to do to be secure? And that's where the journey begins.
Excellent. So
well, and just if I could just jump on that, I mean, they call it the shared responsibility model, right? Because they don't want full responsibility. And so that's a really dangerous thought, is, oh, I'm in the cloud and everything is good. It is shared responsibility. And that's the problem, is it's hard to choke one throat when it's all a shared responsibility.
I was really like wondering why Amazon, and to a lesser extent Azure, were really beating that drum on shared responsibility. Yeah. Like I saw it, I was like, yeah, I get it totally. But, you know, maybe that's just from my experience in the industry, that no one's going to own all the pie. You know, and it's a hot potato. And, you know, arguably the shared responsibility model is good at this identifying you do have responsibility, but it also, you know, Azure's shared responsibility model actually breaks down into service offerings. So you actually get to know how much of the pie you own. And that's a real important piece. And it's something that I now understand why it's a required slide in any cloud security presentation I've seen in the last 5 years, is because it is still a concept that not a lot of people are understanding. But, you know, essentially, if you have a breach in your application sitting on Amazon, do not expect Amazon to notify you of it, because that's not their responsibility. It's your responsibility. You've put that data in there, you've put that code in there. It is your responsibility. And a lot of people are like, no, Amazon is a full service offering. Like, nope, it's not. We got 3 minutes left. I wanted to, you know, Murat, 5 easy steps, methodologies or frameworks that can really help a startup in the right direction.
Yeah, in 2 minutes.
No, you only get one.
Yeah, I want to echo what was already said here. Open source governance. That's a really easy step. This is something that you can plug in. There's a lot of software out there. Plug it in, see that all your licenses are in check, that it's all that you actually can use it, and you don't have to make your software open source now, and make sure that there are no vulnerabilities. It's really easy and available. There is obviously AWS Trusted Advisor and others, but what I really would recommend you is to hire a security expert, security advisor. Give them a couple of your, some percentage out of your advisor stock pool if you don't have enough money or you don't want to affect your runway. But it's super important to actually somebody to hold your hand.
Yeah,
Unless
and I'd like,
yourself.
yeah, we got
Jennifer?
1 minute to share, Ivo. Just quickly, you know, there's standards, there's frameworks, cozy up to one. Figure out what one is. You don't have to necessarily meet everything, but it certainly gives you an understanding of what your journey might look like. And I am a consultant, so it's kind of hard to beat our own drum. But on the flip side of that, if you have somebody who knows, not only knows more than you, can set you in the right direction and stop you from wasting time on things and money on things that may be not the most important thing. Even if you have people who can do it, you often can also benefit from just an extra set of hands, even if it's for, you know, get the airplane off the ground.
Great. And Ivo, final words.
Oh, come on, Ivo.
Right,
There's 20 seconds
okay.
for you, I'm sure.
So if you don't have the expertise
You're on
in-house,
mute.
No, you're not. Terrible joke,
dirty
Jennifer.
tricks. Anyway, so if you don't have the expertise in-house, get the expertise necessary to represent your security function in front of the security professional that are working for the clients that you're selling to. They're going to speak their language. They're going to be able to frame their questions. They're going to be able to defend the efforts that you're going to have. And at the end of the day, they're going to help you sell whatever you're trying to sell them.
Awesome. I'd like to really thank my panelists, Jennifer, Murat, and Ivo. You've been great. This has been a great conversation, and thank Vancouver Startup Week for hosting us.
And thank for all of our participants for hanging in with us there on a Friday afternoon.
And thank you for bearing with all the technical challenges that we faced.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Yeah, and just on behalf of Vancouver Startup Week, thank you so much, Ivo, Jennifer, Alex, Murat, for joining us. That was very informative. It was very eye-opening, and I'm hoping that all the panelists or the attendees can go away and really kind of rethink their security strategies and they'll know who to contact for this.